Commander Reyna Blackwood stood at the observation deck of Nova Arcadia's last remaining military outpost, her weathered hands pressed against the reinforced glass as she watched the evacuation ships disappear into the swirling violet clouds above. The binary stars of the Helios system cast their strange light across the crystalline landscape below. One blood red, one deep blue, creating an otherworldly array of shadows that danced across the jagged terrain. Final civilian transport has cleared the atmosphere, Commander. Lieutenant Kai Ishikawa reported, his normally steady voice carrying a hint of tension. We're all that's left. 36 defenders. That's all that remained of Nova Arcadia's garrison. Not by chance or circumstance, but by choice. Blackwood's choice. The math had been brutal but simple. They had enough ships to evacuate the colony's 20,000 civilians, but not enough time to get everyone out before the Kithrai battle fleet arrived. Someone had to stay behind and hold the line. Status report, Blackwood ordered, turning to face the remaining members of her command. The crystalline command center hummed with activity as her people worked to fortify their position. They were an odd mix, not the elite squadron she would have chosen for humanity's last stand, but perhaps exactly what they needed. Master Sergeant Dominic Torres, their combat engineer, approached with a holographic display of the surrounding terrain. We've converted the crystal formations into a natural fortress, Commander. The mineral composition interferes with Kithrai targeting systems, and we've rigged the larger formations with sonic charges. When they come, they'll be fighting blind. When they come, echoed Lieutenant Ishikawa, they'll bring an army. Latest intel suggests at least 15,000 troops, supported by their biomechanical walkers. The numbers hung in the air like a death sentence. 400 to 1 odds. But Blackwood saw no fear in the faces around her, only grim determination. These weren't fresh recruits or hardened special forces. They were maintenance crews, engineers, medical staff, and a handful of regular infantry who had volunteered to stay behind. Show me our defensive positions, Blackwood ordered, and Torres expanded the hologram. They had transformed the crystalline ridge into a deadly maze. Natural formations had been augmented with salvage technology, creating killing zones and fallback positions. It wouldn't stop the Kithrai, but it would make them pay for every meter in blood. Technical specialist Zora Patel stepped forward, her dark eyes reflecting the hologram's glow. We've reprogrammed the colony's maintenance drones to act as a sensor network. They won't last long in combat, but they'll give us early warning and targeting data. Blackwood nodded. Patel had been a civilian contractor 3 months ago, maintaining the colony's environmental systems. Now she was their best hope for maintaining the jerry-rigged defense grid they'd cobbled together. Contact. The call came from Sergeant First Class Jinwei at the sensor station. Multiple Kithrai vessels entering high orbit. Energy signatures matched their primary battle fleet. They're earlier than expected, Ishikawa muttered. Time to evacuation zone clearance, Blackwood demanded. 4 hours, 17 minutes until the civilian fleet reaches minimum safe distance for FTL jump, Wei replied. Blackwood activated the command center's main display, showing the approaching Kithrai fleet. Their ships were beautiful in their alien way. Organic curves melded with crystalline structures, like someone had grown battleships from living metal. They were as much alive as they were machines, just like their crews. Listen up, Blackwood addressed her people, her voice carrying across the command center. I know none of you were trained for this. We're engineers, techs, and support staff who were supposed to maintain this colony, not defend it. But today, we're all that stands between 20,000 civilians and extinction. She moved through their ranks, meeting each pair of eyes. The Kithrai don't take prisoners. They don't negotiate. They transform worlds and species to match their vision of perfection. We've all seen what happened to the outer colonies, but they've never faced anything like us. Technical specialist Patel raised her hand slightly. Commander, I've been analyzing their approach pattern. They're deploying in a standard Kithrai purification formation. They still think they're facing a conventional colonial defense force. Then let's show them their mistake. Blackwood smiled grimly. Torres, begin Phase 1. Patel, activate the drone network. Lieutenant Ishikawa, get our people to their positions. Remember, we only need to hold for 4 hours. After that, she left the sentence unfinished. They all knew what would likely happen after that. The next 30 minutes were a blur of activity. The 36 defenders moved to their assigned positions throughout the Crystal Ridge. They had divided into small teams, each responsible for a specific sector. Blackwood watched through the command center sensors as her people transformed from their original roles into the warriors they needed to be. Private First Class Yuki Tanaka, formerly a medical technician, now manned a salvaged plasma cannon with the steady hands of a surgeon. Corporal Marcus Rodriguez, who had maintained the colony's hydroponics, had turned his knowledge of physics into devastatingly effective mine placements. The first Kithrai dropships appeared as points of light in the darkening sky, their biomechanical hulls shifting colors to match the atmosphere. They descended with typical Kithrai precision, landing just outside the crystal fields. Here they come, Torres's voice crackled over the comm. First wave is different, Commander. They're sending in Shapers. Blackwood's blood ran cold. Shapers were the Kithrai's elite transformation units, capable of reorganizing matter at the molecular level. They must have detected something about the crystal formations that interested them. Hold positions, she ordered. Let them enter the killing zones. Patel, status on the sonic resonators. Charged and ready, Commander. The crystals will amplify the effect by roughly 300%. The Kithrai Shapers advanced with their characteristic fluid grace, their armor seeming to flow around them like liquid metal. They moved in perfect formation, their steps synchronized as they approached the crystal fields. Behind them came the main assault force, thousands of Kithrai warriors in their biomechanical battle suits. Steady, Blackwood breathed into the comm. Steady. The first Shaper reached out toward a crystal formation, its manipulator fields beginning to glow with transformation energy. That was when Blackwood gave the signal. Now. The ridge erupted in chaos. Torres's sonic charges detonated, sending waves of energy through the crystal formations. The carefully calculated frequencies shattered the Kithrai's sensitive neural networks, disrupting their perfect formation. Simultaneously, every defender opened fire from their hidden positions. The first wave of Shapers fell in seconds, their armor crystallizing and shattering as the sonic waves interfered with their transformation abilities. The main force behind them suffered massive casualties as pre-sighted weapons caught them in devastating crossfire. But the Kithrai were not the galaxy's premier military force for nothing. They adapted with terrifying speed, their battle suits shifting configuration to compensate for the sonic attacks. Return fire began to chew through the crystal formations, sending razor-sharp shards flying everywhere. 3 hours and 42 minutes. Wei's voice reminded them over the comm. Until civilian fleet reaches safe distance. Blackwood watched the battle unfold through her tactical display, directing her people with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra of destruction. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had something the Kithrai didn't understand: the absolute conviction that their lives were worth trading for time. The real test was just beginning. The Kithrai's second wave came like a tide of living metal, their biomechanical forms flowing around the wreckage of their fallen comrades. Commander Blackwood watched through the tactical display as new formations emerged, no longer the precise geometric patterns of their initial assault, but something more organic, adaptive. "They're learning," Lieutenant Ishikawa observed, his fingers dancing across the holographic controls as he redirected their remaining defensive drones. "Those battle suits are evolving in real time." Sergeant Torres's voice crackled through the comm, strained but steady. "Commander, the sonic deterrents are losing effectiveness. Their armor is developing some kind of crystalline lattice structure. They're using our own tactics against us." From her position in the command center, Blackwood could see the entire battlefield transformed into a deadly light show. The binary stars cast competing shadows across the ridge, red and blue light creating purple zones of twilight, where Kithrai forces seemed to phase in and out of visibility. "Patel," Blackwood called, "what are our options?" The technical specialist was already moving, her hands flying over multiple interfaces. "The crystals aren't just reflecting light, Commander. They're conducting energy, all kinds of energy. Every shot fired, every sonic pulse. The entire ridge is becoming one massive circuit." That sparked something in Blackwood's mind. "Can we use that?" "Maybe." Patel's eyes lit up with sudden inspiration. "But we'd need to reconfigure our remaining power cells, and someone would have to manually adjust the crystal resonance frequencies." "Talk to me in solutions, not problems." Patel nodded, her confidence growing. "Give me 20 minutes and Taurus's team. We can turn this whole ridge into one massive energy weapon." A massive explosion rocked the command center. Through the tactical display, Blackwood watched as a section of their defensive line collapsed under a concentrated Kithrai assault. Private Tanaka's voice came through, tight with pain but determined. "Section 7 is compromised. They'd brought in some kind of living battering ram. Our weapons barely scratch it. Fall back to secondary positions," Blackwood ordered. "Rodriguez, do you still have those experimental charges?" "4 left, Commander, but they're unstable as hell." "Make them count." The next few minutes were chaos. While Patel and Torres worked their technical miracle, the rest of the defenders fought a fighting retreat through the crystal maze. The Kithrai pressed their advantage, but each step forward cost them dearly. Corporal Rodriguez proved that his time in hydroponics hadn't been wasted. His charges, cobbled together from industrial chemicals and mining explosives, created reactions that ate through the Kithrai's adaptive armor like acid through paper. 3 of their massive ram beasts fell, their biomechanical components dissolving into useless slag. 2 hours and 55 minutes to civilian fleet safety. Way updated, his voice steady despite the streams of data flowing across his screens. Enemy forces at approximately 60% strength. Blackwood allowed herself a grim smile. They'd bloodied the Kithrai nose, destroying far more of their forces than anyone could have expected. But she could see the tide turning. The enemy was adapting faster now, each wave learning from the failures of the last. "Commander," Patel's excited voice cut through the battle chatter. "We're ready. But there's a catch. Someone has to manually synchronize the crystal frequencies from 3 different points around the ridge." "Suicide missions," Ishikawa said quietly. "Volunteer missions," Blackwood corrected. "And I need 3. She didn't have to wait long. Rodriguez, his last charges spent, volunteered first. Sergeant Way stood from his sensor station, passing his duties to another technician. And to Blackwood's surprise, Private Tanaka, despite her injuries, stepped forward. "I was a concert pianist before I was a medic," Tanaka said with a pained smile. "I know something about synchronization." The plan was desperate, but then everything about their stand was desperate. While the rest of the defenders would draw Kithrai attention with an aggressive push, the 3 volunteers would move to the synchronization points. They would have to time their actions perfectly, miss by a fraction of a second, and the energy buildup would tear the ridge apart. 3 minutes to get into position, Patel instructed, handing each volunteer a modified sensor unit. "When you see the signal, you'll have exactly 10 seconds to input the sequence. The crystals will do the rest." Blackwood watched them go, these 3 who were almost certainly walking to their deaths. Rodriguez, the gardener who'd become a demolitions expert. Way, the quiet analyst who'd directed their defense with mathematical precision. Tanaka, who'd healed their wounds under fire and now moved with desperate grace despite her own injuries. The Kithrai chose that moment to launch their largest assault yet. Thousands of warriors advanced behind massive shield projections, while their aerial units began systematic bombardment of the ridge's upper levels. The remaining defenders met them with everything they had left: salvaged weapons, improvised explosives, and the last of their sonic charges. In position, Rodriguez reported. Ready. From Wei. Waiting for the signal, Tanaka. Her breath labored but determined. Patel's fingers flew across her console, monitoring the energy buildups. Massive power spike in the crystal matrix. Now or never, Commander. Blackwood took a deep breath. For Nova Arcadia. Execute. The world turned white. The crystal ridge, saturated with energy from hours of battle, transformed into a massive geometric amplifier. The carefully synchronized frequencies triggered a cascade effect, turning stored energy into a devastating wave that rippled outward in all directions. Kithrai battle suits locked up, their adaptive properties overwhelmed by the competing energy patterns. Their living metal components began to crystallize, transforming entire squadrons into glittering statues. The massive ram beasts toppled, their biomechanical systems short-circuiting. When the light faded, the battlefield had transformed. Thousands of Kithrai warriors stood frozen in crystalline stasis, their perfect formations now perfect monuments to their defeat. But the victory had come at a terrible cost. Rodriguez and Wei are gone, Ishikawa reported softly. Their positions were at the epicenter of the energy wave. Tanaka is alive, Patel called out. Barely. Her position was partially shielded. Blackwood allowed herself one moment to honor the fallen before turning back to the tactical display. The Kithrai forces had been devastated, but already she could see their rear echelons regrouping, preparing for another push. 2 hours and 20 minutes, Wei's replacement announced. The defenders of Nova Arcadia had won their first real victory. But as Blackwood looked at her remaining forces, now down to 31, she knew the real test was still to come. The Kithrai would not underestimate them again. In the distance, lightning played through the crystal forests, and the binary stars began their slow dance toward convergence. The next phase of the battle would take place in double shadows, where the line between light and darkness, between victory and defeat, would blur beyond recognition. The binary stars aligned overhead, casting the battlefield in an eerie purple twilight. Through the crystallized remains of the Kithrai front line, Commander Blackwood watched their remaining forces regroup. The enemy's movements had changed. Gone was the fluid grace of their earlier assaults, replaced by something more cautious, more calculating. They're keeping their distance, Ishikawa noted, manipulating the holographic display to track enemy movements, running constant sensor sweeps of the crystal formations. Of course they are, Patel said, not looking up from her jury-rigged control station. We just turned their front line into a crystal garden. They're trying to figure out how we did it. Blackwood studied the tactical display, noting how the Kithrai forces had split into smaller, more dispersed units. How many charges do we have left? 2 sonic disruptors, maybe 15 minutes of conventional ammunition between us, Ishikawa reported. The crystal matrix is still charged, but we can't pull off another surge like that without. He paused, glancing at the positions where Rodriguez and Wei had made their final stand. Before Blackwood could respond, a new signal cut across their communications. The voice that emerged was strange, musical yet mechanical, the sound of the Kithrai's biomechanical translation systems. Defenders of Nova Arcadia. The voice resonated through the crystal formations. I am War Director Nexus 4. You have earned the right of direct communication. Blackwood exchanged glances with her officers. The Kithrai rarely communicated with their opponents, viewing most species as beneath their notice. This was unprecedented. Patch me through, she ordered. Let's hear what they have to say. Your tactics are unprecedented. Nexus 4 continued. You have forced us to reevaluate our approach. Surrender now, and we will preserve your neural patterns before transformation. Your ingenuity will become part of the collective. Private Tanaka, who had been brought back to the command center for treatment, laughed darkly from her medical cot. Preserve our neural patterns. That's a new way of saying they'll download our brains before killing us. But Blackwood was focused on something else. The tactical display showed subtle movements in the Kithrai lines. While their commander talked, they were maneuvering into new positions. Not for a frontal assault, but they're trying to flank us through the lower crystal caverns, she realized. The communication is a distraction. Patil, what's the status of our sensor drones? 3 operational, 2 minutes of power each. Make them count. Get me a visual on those caverns. The remaining drones dove into the labyrinthine passages beneath the ridge. The footage they transmitted confirmed Blackwood's suspicions. Kithrai infiltration units were advancing through the crystal tunnels, their battle suits adapted for close-quarters combat. But something else caught her attention. The crystal formations in the caverns were different, older, with distinct geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. "Commander," Patil's voice held a note of excitement. "Those aren't natural formations. They're remnants of the original colony's power distribution network. We built this outpost on top of them because they amplified our power signals." Ishikawa leaned forward. "Could we use them?" "Not like before." Patil shook her head. "But there might be another way. The Kithrai battle suits are partially organic, right? They adapt by essentially evolving in real time. Get to the point, specialist. Evolution requires energy, lots of it. Every time they adapt, their suits draw massive power to reconfigure their molecular structure. What if we could disrupt that process?" Understanding dawned on Blackwood's face. "We force them to adapt, then cut off their power supply mid-transformation." Exactly. Those crystal networks were designed to channel energy in specific frequencies. If we can lure enough of their forces into the caverns and trigger an adaptation response, their suits will lock up mid-transformation, Ishikawa finished. They'll be trapped in their own armor. It was a brilliant plan, but there was a catch. Someone would have to manually overload the crystal networks from within the caverns, right in the path of the advancing Kithrai forces. "I'll go," Tanaka said, trying to sit up despite her injuries. "I already know the frequency patterns." "No," Blackwood cut her off. "You can barely walk. I need you here, coordinating with Patil." "I'll go." "Commander," Ishikawa began to protest. "Lieutenant, you have tactical command. Hold the ridge for 90 more minutes." "That's an order." Before anyone could argue further, a massive explosion rocked the command center. Through the tactical display, they watched as Kithrai heavy units began a renewed assault on their front lines, while their infiltration teams pushed deeper into the caverns. "Time to move," Blackwood ordered. "Patil, talk me through this. What am I looking for?" The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Blackwood moved through the crystal tunnels, guided by Patil's voice in her ear and the pulsing light of the ancient power networks. Behind her, she could hear the sound of Kithrai units advancing, the whisper of their adaptive armor, the subtle clicks of their weapon systems. "The main junction should be 20 meters ahead," Patil instructed. "You'll need to overload the primary node, then get clear before the feedback pulse hits." Blackwood found the node, a massive crystal formation that thrummed with barely contained energy. As she began the overload sequence, she heard movement behind her. The Kithrai infiltration team had found her. "Commander, more enemy units converging on your position." Ishikawa's voice was tense. "You need to move." But Blackwood stood her ground, continuing the sequence even as the first Kithrai warrior rounded the corner. Its battle suit was already beginning to adapt to the crystal environment, the living metal flowing and reshaping itself. Perfect. She input the final command just as the Kithrai opened fire. Plasma bolts sizzled past her as she dove behind a crystal formation. The node pulsed once, twice, then erupted in a cascade of energy that raced through the ancient network. The effect was immediate and devastating. Every Kithrai battle suit in the caverns began to transform, responding to the sudden energy surge. But as their suits tried to adapt, the overloaded crystals cut off their power supply. Dozens of warriors froze mid-transformation, their living armor becoming their prison. "Energy cascade successful," Patil reported. "Cavern system is clear." "Commander." "Commander, report." Blackwood picked herself up slowly, checking for injuries. The blast had thrown her against the crystal wall, but her armor had absorbed most of the impact. Around her, Kithrai warriors stood frozen in grotesque poses, their partially transformed battle suits fused with the crystal formations. "I'm here," she responded. "How much time?" 83 minutes until civilian fleet reaches safety, Ishikawa reported. "Enemy forces are pulling back, regrouping. Whatever you did down there, it got their attention." "Good," Blackwood said, starting her climb back to the surface. "Because they're about to get very, very angry." She emerged from the caverns to find the binary stars beginning to separate, their competing light creating new shadows across the battlefield. The remaining defenders, 28 now, had held their positions, but the cost was written in burned-out weapons and exhausted faces. In the distance, she could see the Kithrai forces massing for what would surely be their most desperate assault yet. War Director Nexus 4 had gone silent, but the message was clear: there would be surrender. The final phase of the battle was about to begin, and Blackwood knew that everything they'd done so far had just been preparation for what was to come. The real test of their determination, and humanity's defiance, lay ahead. As if in response to her thoughts, the crystals around them began to sing, their frequencies shifting in harmony with the approaching storm. The defenders of Nova Arcadia checked their weapons, tended their wounded, and prepared to make their last hour count. The price of victory. The Kithrai's final assault began with a scream that shook the crystal ridge to its foundations. Their remaining forces had merged into something new, a writhing mass of biomechanical horror that flowed across the battlefield like liquid metal. War Director Nexus 4 had committed everything to this last attack, combining their surviving units into a single, massive entity. "By all that's holy," Ishikawa whispered, watching through the tactical display. "They're sacrificing individual control for raw power." Patel's fingers flew across her console, analyzing the new threat. The individual units are linking their battle suits together, creating some kind of just-felt entity. They're not even trying to adapt anymore. They're just going to overwhelm us with brute force. Commander Blackwood watched the approaching nightmare with calculating eyes. 28 defenders remained, holding a defensive line that grew thinner by the minute. The civilian fleet needed just 60 more minutes to reach safety. "Status on the crystal matrix," she demanded. "Barely holding together," Patel reported. "We might be able to generate one more energy pulse, but it would collapse the entire ridge. And after what we did in the caverns, they'll be expecting it." The massive Kithrai entity surged forward, absorbing the crystallized remains of their fallen comrades into its mass. Where it touched the crystal formations, the ancient stones began to crack and splinter. "Commander," Tanaka called from her station, where she'd been monitoring their biological readings. "Those energy readings, they're not just combining their battle suits, they're merging their consciousness. The entire Kithrai force is becoming a single mind." That was when Blackwood saw their opportunity. A single mind. A single point of failure. "Patel, if we can't overload the crystal matrix, can we reverse it? Turn it into an energy sink instead of a weapon." Understanding dawned on the specialist's face. Their gestalt consciousness will require massive amounts of energy to maintain. If we could disrupt that energy flow, the backlash would tear their combined form apart, Ishikawa finished. "But we'd need to get inside their defensive perimeter to plant the disruption charges." "No," Blackwood said quietly. "We'd need to get inside their actual form. The charges would have to be delivered directly into their mass." Silence fell over the command center as the implications became clear. Someone would have to sacrifice themselves, allowing their body to be absorbed by the Kithrai entity to deliver the charges. "I'll do it," Tanaka said, struggling to stand despite her injuries. "I'm already wounded and—" "We all go," Blackwood cut her off. "Look at their pattern. They're going to absorb everything in their path. We can't stop that, but we can use it. Patel, how many disruption charges can you fashion from our remaining power cells?" 28. One for each of us. The plan came together quickly because it had to. The Kithrai entity was less than a kilometer from their position now, its massive form casting shadows that seemed to swallow the light from both suns. Each defender was equipped with a modified power cell, calibrated to release its energy in a precise frequency that would disrupt the Kithrai's merged consciousness. They would space themselves along the defensive line, waiting until the entity absorbed them. 45 minutes, Ishikawa announced, until civilian fleet safety. Blackwood looked at her people, engineers, technicians, and soldiers who had become something more in these desperate hours. "It has been the highest honor," she said simply. The Kithrai entity struck their lines like a tidal wave of living metal. One by one, the defenders were enveloped, their forms disappearing into the writhing mass. But each carried with them a seed of destruction, timed to detonate in perfect sequence. Blackwood was the last to be absorbed. As the liquid metal closed around her, she saw through the entity's own senses a vast, alien consciousness that had sacrificed its individuality in the pursuit of victory. In its arrogance, it had made itself vulnerable to the very thing it sought to destroy: human ingenuity. Now, she transmitted, and 28 disruption charges detonated as one. Legacy of the 36. The blast was visible from orbit, a pulse of energy that turned the entire ridge into a massive disruption field. The Kithrai entity's unified consciousness shattered, its combined form ripping itself apart as millions of conflicting signals tore through its neural network. When the light faded, the battlefield was unrecognizable. The crystal ridge had collapsed, its ancient formations reduced to glittering dust. Of the Kithrai force, nothing remained but scattered pieces of inert battle suits and crystallized biomatter. But rising from the destruction were figures in scorched armor, 28 humans, somehow protected from the blast by the very energy field they had created. The Kithrai's attempt to absorb them had backfired spectacularly. Their own defensive systems turned against them. 30 minutes to civilian fleet safety. Paddle's voice was weak but triumphant. We did it." The survivors gathered in what remained of their command center, watching as the last traces of Kithrai presence vanished from their sensors. They had held the line, but the cost had been etched into their bodies and souls. News of their victory spread quickly through human space. The defense of Nova Arcadia became a symbol of humanity's resilience, studied in military academies and celebrated in stories. But more importantly, it changed how the Kithrai saw humanity. 3 months after the battle, the first peace envoys arrived. The Kithrai, shaken by the loss of an entire legion and a war director to just 36 defenders, had been forced to reevaluate their assumption of human inferiority. Commander Blackwood, still recovering from her injuries, met with the Kithrai representatives in the rebuilt command center. The crystalline dust from the battle had seeded new formations, creating structures that seemed to bridge human and Kithrai architectural styles. "Your victory has transformed us," the Kithrai ambassador admitted, its battle suit now configured for diplomacy rather than war. "We sought to perfect the galaxy through force, but you showed us a different kind of perfection. The strength that comes from choosing to stand against impossible odds." The 36 defenders became legends, their names inscribed in a memorial that grew from the crystal dust of their battlefield. But their greatest legacy was not in the songs sung about their victory or the tactical analyses of their strategies. Their legacy lived in the peace that followed, in the understanding that true strength lies not in overwhelming force or superior technology, but in the indomitable spirit of those who choose to stand when retreat is possible, who fight not for glory but for others. Commander Reyna Blackwood stood at the memorial 5 years later, watching a group of Kithrai and human children studying together among the new crystal formations. The binary stars still cast their competing lights across the landscape, but now the shadows they created seemed less threatening, more like a reminder of how light and darkness, victory and sacrifice, were all part of the same great pattern. "Was it worth it?" a young cadet asked her, looking up at the memorial where 36 names glowed in the crystal matrix. Blackwood smiled, touching the memorial gently. "Ask them," she said, gesturing to the children playing below, to the mixed crews of human and Kithrai ships now exploring the galaxy together, to the new future they had purchased with their courage. In the end, the 36 had done more than save a colony. They had shown that humanity's greatest strength lay not in its weapons or technology, but in its ability to stand together in the face of impossible odds, to fight not just for survival, but for a future worth believing in. The crystals hummed their ancient songs, and in their harmonies, some said they could still hear echoes of that last, desperate stand, a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying an enemy, but from transforming them into something better. The legend of the 36 would be told as long as humans reached for the stars, not as a story of war, but as a testament to the power of determination, sacrifice, and the unquenchable human spirit that could turn even defeat into a kind of victory. And in the depths of space, watching over 100 worlds, the Kithrai remembered, and they taught their own children about the day they learned that true perfection comes not from forcing change, but from the courage to stand fast when standing seems impossible. The end.